with PSNI to develop a robust business case for the funding required to cover workforce numbers over the course of the current mandate. I am pleased to confirm this business case has been submitted to the Department of Finance for its consideration. I should stress that affordability remains a key issue in terms of business case approval. However, subject to the Department of Finance approval, I will continue to work collaboratively with my executive colleagues to seek the additional funding required.
Mr Bradley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answer. Minister, but to add to your woes, how much do you think the Labour Government's employer national insurance rise will cost the PSNI?
Minister.
Well, it's difficult to speak to specifically how much it will cost the PSNI. I know that stabilisation pressures have increased by about 60 million due to changes in employer national insurance contributions. And that includes things like the Northern Ireland Civil Service Pay Award assumptions and also legal aid fees recommended in the Burgess report. So there has been a considerable increase in stabilisation pressures within the department. Looking to the PSNI specifically, excluding employer NIC and next pay award pressures, it stands at around 17.98 million pressures that they need to meet in the current year.
Colin Crawford.
Mr Speaker, can the Minister outline the actions she has taken to support the police recruitment campaign and dispel the negative commentary surrounding it?
Minister.
Well, first of all, I think it's really important that we were able to have a recruitment campaign. I think it's very important that the PSNI are right-sized in terms of being able to provide the critical service that they do. It's a service that I would encourage any young person, irrespective of their background, to consider a career in, because I think it's important in terms of public service that we get the brightest and best of our young people engaged in the PSNI, and that's a case that I have made repeatedly when I've been interviewed about the issue and when I've been asked questions about the issue. Clearly, there have been some negative commentary. There's been some negative commentary both around the adverts that the PSNI launched and then also some others who have tried to intimidate and threaten those who would wish to join the PSNI, neither of which I view to be helpful. I think it's in all of our interests as a community that we have a representative police force so that when people see the PSNI, they see themselves reflected in the PSNI and that they know that they are members of our community, serving our community.
Diane Armstrong.
Please.
Minister.
The report was received by my department on the 22nd of January 2025 and was published on the 30th of January 2025. I'll now take time to consider the report's findings and afford the Policing Board and Chief Constable time to reflect on the recommendations relevant to them. I will outline my response to the recommendations in due course.
Ms Armstrong.
Thank you. Thank you to the Minister for her response. Minister, do you believe that policing has been overly politicised in the past as per the report, and what action will you take to rectify this from a DOJ point of view?
Sir.
Well, I think there is always a danger that policing will become politicised, by which I mean party politicised. Because, of course, policing is inherently a political issue. It requires the support of the public, it requires the support of politicians, it requires us to engender confidence within policing, and it is an inherent part of the transformation of our society, and policing was part of that transformation. So it's inherently political in that sense, but it shouldn't become a party political football, and it also shouldn't be politicised in terms of its operational development. And in terms of the Department of Justice, I'm very clear that it's important that I respect the tripartite arrangements and that I allow the constable to be operationally responsible to the Policing Board and allow the Policing Board to hold the Chief Constable to account, rather than to do that through me in this chamber, which some members I think would prefer. Because the history of our policing and our oversight arrangements are delicate. They are informed by our experience, and what the results of this particular review show is that in the main they are working. And albeit that they may need tweaked here and there in order to make them more effective, what they certainly weren't saying is rub it out and start again.
Patsy Whitlow.
Minister, you took us into the realm there of the current tripartite arrangements. Could you outline your assessment, please, of the effectiveness of the current tripartite arrangements with regard to accountability and delivery, given the recommendation in the review that they should be subject to a new partnership agreement?
Minister.
There was no suggestion in the report that the current tripartite arrangements are not appropriate. However, I think what was suggested in the report, something indeed which I considered at length with the Policing Board in the previous mandate, was whether or not we needed, in light of there now being devolved institutions, which were not here at the time of the institution of the Policing Board and the PSNI reforms, to clarify the lines of accountability so that we can refresh people's minds about where the responsibilities for different things lie. I think any clarity that we can bring to those arrangements in terms of the robustness of them and the effectiveness of them would be helpful. I also think that, crucially, the strategic element that obviously that has been highlighted in the report is something that I think they got from their conversations with the board, who were saying themselves that they wish to be strategic in their oversight of policing, and that will be aided greatly both by their own strategic plan and by PSNI's strategic plan. So I think that the current operations work pretty well. I think it was important that we did a health check after recent events, because I think, again, we have a duty to ensure that the public have confidence in those arrangements, and not just those of us who are using those arrangements and working through those arrangements on a day-to-day basis.
Dillon.
Thank you, Minister. Ceist over a tree.
Minister.
The Domestic Abuse Information Sharing with Schools Regulations Northern Ireland 2022, which makes statutory provision for Operation Encompass, came into operation on the 1st of April 2022. The regulations were drafted by the Department of Justice in partnership with the Department of Education, the Department for the Economy and the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. However, whilst my department brought forward the regulations to provide for Operation Encompass, responsibility for the rollout of Operation Encompass sits with the Department for Education and the Education Authority. The EA's Child Protection Support Service operates Operation Encompass across all schools through the provision of advisory support, training and information sharing with the PSNI. I'm advised the scheme is working well and allows staff to provide direct emotional support to child victims of domestic violence. The EA has completed a limited evaluation on the impact of the scheme within the school setting, and it's hoped that this will be shared with partners once it has been approved by the relevant EA governance procedures. Since the commencement of the pilot, there have been over 30,000 referrals to schools across Northern Ireland.
Mrs. Dillon.
Thank you, Minister, for your answer. And as you know, Operation Encompass, as you've outlined, did come in under the Domestic Abuse Bill, and I think it has been something that has been very valuable. Do you see any merit in broadening it out in terms of where reference can be made in terms of referrals in relation to children who go into school?
Minister.
Well, I think since the commencement of the pilot, as I said, there have been over 30,000 referrals to schools, which I think shows how necessary this information sharing protocol has been. Currently, the sharing information provides an administrative demand on policing, particularly in sharing, and then on teachers in receiving that information. However, all of the parties fully agree the ethos behind Operation Encompass is incredibly worthwhile and are now working together to streamline it and to try to automate the sharing of information where that's possible. That will reduce the administrative burden, but more importantly, it should allow that information sharing to be undertaken more quickly and without any delay, so that we can then provide the support to young people in the classroom more expeditiously. In the last 6 months, the Police Service have introduced an email facility to schools to ask for a callback where they have been unable to reach the designated teacher, and that alerts the designated teacher that there is a referral to be received. I'm advised PSNI and the Education Authority are now developing a mechanism to fully automate the process in making the referral file the public protection notices. A PPN is required for every domestic abuse incident or crime the police attend and collates a significant amount of the relevant information to share with the schools. Currently, there have been a small number of pilot schools in Belfast identified to test this latter concept via secure email accounts, and it's hoped that that new phase pilot then will be able to be rolled out and provide more timely interventions for the young people involved.
I want to stick with the issue of domestic abuse a bit more generally, if I may. Can I ask the Minister, what's being done to support male victims of domestic abuse and coercive control and to encourage them to come forward? Because, not to diminish in any shape or form the violence against women and girls piece, but I would be concerned that men and boys could fall behind.
Minister.
Well, I think it's a really important question, and I think it's also a very a very timely one. When we introduced the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Bill, as it was then, act as it is now, to this House, I was very clear that the provisions we brought forward were to be gender neutral. So irrespective of one's gender, sexuality, race, age, whatever you identify as, you were able to fall into the categories that were listed within the domestic abuse provisions, because I recognise that while stereotypically people always assume that it is a strong man physically abusing a weaker woman, that is not actually always the pattern of domestic abuse. There can be many permutations, whether that be within same-sex relationships, whether it be parent and child abuse within the home, where, for example, a child who is the main carer can exert coercive control over a parent who is reliant on them for care. All of that is captured within the domestic abuse offence. It's important, therefore, also, when we see synergies, which we do, with the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, that we recognise that not all violence against women and girls happens in a domestic setting, and not all domestic offences are against women and girls. In our original advertising around this, we were very clear to make sure we showed a range of different victims, and in terms of the support that we provide for victims of domestic abuse, there are representatives of charities who are involved with male victims who provide that support for men who come forward and make those disclosures.
Connie Egan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answers so far. Could I ask what will happen in the next phase of Operation Encompass and how it will evolve?
Minister.
Well, obviously the harm that domestic and sexual abuse causes to the lives of children and young people are significant. There were strong calls for the strategy, for example, in terms of the domestic and sexual abuse strategy, to include a fifth pillar in addition to partnership, prevention, support and provision and justice, specifically focused on meeting the needs of children and young people. And it's clear that we want to do more to prevent young people becoming victims of domestic violence and abuse, or witnessing domestic violence abuse within the home. I think the important part of this, however, is that digitisation project that I mentioned, which is being brought forward by the EA and the PSNI. I think by streamlining the communications between them, it will ensure that we're able to expedite contact with young people who may have been subjected in the hours before they arrive at school to a domestic incident at home. That may have required them to leave their home in order to find a place of safety. It may have meant that they did not get any sleep that night. It may mean that they come to school without their homework done or their uniform. And we need sensitivity around the school in terms of how we handle those situations, so that rather than those things being escalated to a disciplinary issue, making a young person dread going to school, they actually see school as a place where they can get some respite from what's happening at home.
Cara Hunter.
Speaker, I thank the Minister for her answers so far. Minister, recently I spoke with a domestic abuse survivor whose ex-partner repeatedly drives past her home, but sadly this has not met the threshold for stalking. In sad cases like this, where it is not technically deemed either a domestic incident or crime, but could be seen as a form of a psychological weapon, do you think we can do more with Operation Encompass on cases like this to have that data shared with the school?
Well, Operation Encompass wouldn't particularly pertain to an adult's experience, for example, of someone driving past their home, and it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment on individual cases, but a person repeatedly arriving at your place of work, at your place of residence, a person initiating contact with you that you have made clear that you do not wish to receive, a person who behaves in a way that is fixated, is obsessive, is unwanted and is repetitive, is the very definition of stalking. And I would encourage your constituent to seek further legal advice as to whether there are legal avenues that they can pursue in relation either to getting a non-molestation order or to pursuing a charge of stalking against the individual involved.
Clark.
There are currently no transgender prisoners housed in Northern Ireland.
I thank the Minister for that answer. Minister, given that there has been lots of conversations about transgender males going to female prisons, is now not the time, given that there's none housed in any of the prison system, to make a very clear decision that if you're a biological male, you stay in a biological male prison, and if you're a biological female, you stay in a female prison?
Minister.
Well, there is no need for a clear decision to be made. A clear decision has already been set out, and that is that people will be housed in the prison system in a way that maintains and protects their dignity, their privacy and, crucially, their safety. And that remains the policy the Prison Service will follow.
Peter McGrath.
Question number 5.
Northern Ireland Prison Service, like all public services, has faced budgetary pressures over a number of years. In response, Prison Services made significant efforts to drive efficiencies where possible, but in doing so has been mindful at all times of the need to ensure the safety of both prisoners and staff. The rising prison population is placing a pressure on the Northern Ireland Prison Service and all prison services across the UK and Ireland. On the 1st of February 2022, the total prison population in Northern Ireland was 1,601. On February 2025, the population had increased by almost 20% to 1,913. Between February 23 and 1st of February 2025 alone, there has been an increase of 170 prisoners. Prison services dealing with more complex individuals in custody with poor mental health, drug and alcohol addictions and higher numbers of older people in prison. As a result of the increase in prisoner population and following a review of the operational staffing levels, I have approved the recruitment of a further 75 prison officers. Prison Service remains focused on supporting the rehabilitation of people in custody so that when they leave prison they're able to resettle and contribute in a meaningful way that supports the Executive's commitment to making communities safer. However, the ability of Prison Service to deliver on this work has been impacted by the rising population, the high levels of remand prisoners and short sentence prisoners and a rise in public protection cases. In response to this pressure, the Prison Service has commissioned a review of its rehabilitation model. This review is scheduled to be completed within the next few months. The finding from that review may mean additional funding is required to support rehabilitation work, and I'll consider any such requests sympathetically. Prison Service is a robust and agile organisation that has proven itself able to change and adapt over many years. The results of the recent Highbank Wood College inspections are testament to that determination, and I'm confident it can continue to respond to the pressures it currently faces in respect of rising population.
Mr McReynolds.
I thank the Minister for her response. Minister, what are the impacts of a rising population on each prison establishment?
Well, I thank the member for the question, and each prison establishment will be distinct and different. Highbank Wood is the smallest prison establishment in Northern Ireland. Despite its size, Highbank comes with its own complexity, housing both young male and female prisoners on a single site. Whilst the young male population there has remained relatively stable, the female population has increased from 70 to 113 between February 2022 and February 2025. McGilligan is an adult male prison, primarily holding sentenced prisoners as they progress towards release. The population of McGilligan is being carefully managed to sustain it as close to a capacity of 500 prisoners as is possible. The reason for that careful population management is to alleviate the ongoing pressure on Maghaberry Prison. Maghaberry is the largest and most complex prison in Northern Ireland. It's a high-security prison for adult male prisoners, both sentenced and unsentenced, and in integrated and separated conditions. Since February 2022, the population has increased by 25% to 1,270, with nearly half of the prisoners held there, 632, on remand.
Stephen Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The number of assaults on prison staff have trebled in the last 4 years, from 32 in 2020 up to 96 in 2024. Does the Minister feel this has had an adverse impact on the recent recruitment campaign, and what more can be done to tackle this growing problem?
The recent recruitment campaign has actually been quite successful, and the numbers of people are coming forward. In comparison to other jurisdictions who have also run recruitment campaigns, Northern Ireland remains in a much healthier position in terms of applications than some other jurisdictions. However, it undoubtedly has an impact on the prison staff who are already in place. When there is more disruption in prisons, when it is a more volatile situation, which is the case when you have increasing numbers, people are often unable to benefit from the full regime, and as a result then people get frustrated and the volatility increases, and it is a spiralling situation. We have managed nevertheless to keep the prisons reasonably stable, to keep the prisons reasonably safe, but there is still a challenge as we grow in numbers of prisoners about the access that people have to opportunities in order to let off steam and to be able to avail of therapy, to be able to avail of education, to be able to avail of all of the regime. For prison officers, that is also quite challenging because it means people spending longer in their cells, and that again is a challenge for officers. What's important for me is that the recruitment of new officers into prison service will allow us over the course of the summer to have additional officers there to restore regime, and then, as I say, through the review to look at what we can do around rehabilitation that perhaps better reflects the new prison population that we have to manage within the establishments now.
Doug Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Minister, your answer there actually feeds in well to the question I'm about to ask, because it's about pressures and the moral component. The Department of Finance believes that the sick absence policy for the Northern Ireland Prison Service should be the same as for all civil servants. Does the Minister agree that the unique role of our prison service should be taken into account with this policy? And what is she doing to get them to change this to reflect that unique role?
We recognise that right across the civil service there will be people who act in frontline roles, whose jobs are distinct and different to those who are office-based and often don't have to interact with often vulnerable but also often volatile members of the public. Prison service is a particularly unique situation, which is why we have put unique supports in place, whether that's through access to PRRT, and the work that's done there, both in terms of psychology and also physiotherapy for prison officers, and rehabilitation and training where that is required, but also the work that we do within prisons to support prison officers in the role that they face. In terms of sickness absence, it is of course important that we drive down sickness absence, but I recognise that sickness absence can be driven up because people are working longer hours, taking additional shifts when the prison service is under stress, which is one of the reasons why I think it is so important that we recruit a new cadre of officers so that we're able to relieve some of that pressure and allow those officers who perhaps are suffering from stress to be able to make their way back into the system. But with any HR system, it has to look at the roles and the functions that somebody actually is involved in. It doesn't mean that it's a different system, but it has to be sensitive to the nature of the role and that standard HR procedure.
Just McDulty.
I thank the Minister for her answers thus far. Minister, to what extent are disputes with legal practitioners and the associated strike action putting further duress on the prison system?
Well, to be clear, there isn't a dispute with legal practitioners, there is a dispute with the criminal bar. The remainder of the legal practitioners are working and continuing to do so and working with me. Only the criminal bar have withdrawn their services at this point in time. As far as I'm aware, certainly that is the case, and I met with the criminal bar just in the last week or so to work through some of the issues that they raised. It does, of course, if there are delays to trial, increase the remand population. And it does mean that there will be people who are in prison who potentially should not be in prison, and that there are people not in prison who potentially should be. And I think that is something for the criminal bar to reflect on as they decide how to take their action forward.
Sinead McLaughlin.
Question number 6.
Minister.
I published the terms of reference for the review into the case of Jonathan Cresswell on Friday, the 21st of February. I also confirmed that I had appointed Jan Melia as the independent reviewer. I believe that the terms of reference are expansive and provide the reviewer with the scope to look at any and all issues she considers relevant to this case. I'm very mindful that the family of Katie Simpson need to be at the heart of this review, and as a matter of priority, the reviewer will be engaging with them to hear their voice directly and to understand how they wish to be engaged in and by the process. I have also received confirmation from the key agencies that they will actively engage in and cooperate with the review, and I welcome the commitment they have shown to learning from this case. It is vital that the reviewer is now given the time and space to undertake this important piece of work and to report on her findings.
Ms McLaughlin.
Thank you, Minister, and I really welcome this progress. There were just so many missed opportunities that literally could have saved Katie Simpson's life. Would the Minister agree that this important piece of work should not limit its learnings to this tragic case, but should export it right across every incident and case, and that the lack of resources should not be an excuse for a lack of professional curiosity from the PSNI?
Well, to be clear, it will not only be the PSNI whose actions and interventions will be considered. There were a whole range of opportunities throughout a whole range of statutory agencies. where earlier intervention may have made a difference to the outcome, and none of us can say with confidence whether it would or wouldn't, but we can say if those opportunities were missed, we would not want that to happen in another case. It's also crucial to say that any learning from this will, of course, want to be embedded within organisations. Undoubtedly, Mr Speaker, and I have raised it in this chamber before, when we lack resources for these key services that are provided, whether that be the PSNI, whether that be probation, whether that be health, whether it be any other part of the system, cases will fall through the net. And as I explained, whilst many people don't see justice as a matter of life and death in the same way they view health, it absolutely can be. And so it is important that justice is properly resourced, but also that, as you quite rightly say, that professional curiosity from all sectors is something that we engender. This is not to be a finger-pointing exercise. This is to be a lessons learned exercise so that we don't continue to repeat the mistakes of the past.
Nuala McAllister.
I thank the Minister for her answer and also welcome the publication of the Terms of Reference last week. I think this is a very positive opportunity in which we can learn from missed opportunities in the past. But I also wanted to ask regarding the partners that are involved, if you could confirm whether there would be scope to include other trusts other than the Western Trust, because we now know that Katie Simpson unfortunately attended hospital in the Southern Trust area, and on many occasions with Jonathan Creswell himself, when it turned out that she was a victim of his abuse at the time and he was the reason why she had actually attended hospital.
Minister.
Well, the Terms of Reference, I think, cover all of the key issues, and obviously the key departments that we anticipate would have some input to make. However, they also give the independent reviewer scope to pursue whatever fields of inquiry she believes are relevant, and that would include any engagement with other trusts, other hospitals and other practitioners. Critically, the review is going to be focused on learning, because it's important that we take away any lessons to safeguard and better protect victims who are subject to terrible forms of abuse, but also often to coercive control. So these are broad parameters, and whilst I think that they are quite expansive, they do allow other issues of concern, if raised with the reviewer, to be included, even if they're out with the Terms of Reference, because I think they've been set up in such a way that she does have a degree of freedom to do that.
Question number 7.
Limavady Courthouse has been closed since March 2020, with its business currently transferred to Coleraine. Prior to its closure, the building operated as a hearing centre and was open for 1 day a week for the delivery of magistrates' court business. The Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunals Estate Strategy, published in December 2023, provides a long-term framework for investment over the next decade and beyond. To implement the strategy, Northern Ireland Courts and Tribunal Service is using data and evidence to baseline the existing estate against the agreed strategic outcomes, assess the adequacy of its buildings, and, in the context of the finite resources available, develop prioritised investment plans that will be subject to public consultation as appropriate. The future use of Limavady Courthouse forms part of that process.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for that answer. I suppose one of my biggest concerns about courthouses across Northern Ireland is access to justice primarily, but also the impact that it will have in rural areas in terms of removing courthouses. So as part of this review, will the Minister be looking at an impact assessment to ensure that we are taking into account all the various aspects as to why not having a courthouse is a good thing?
Well, first of all, we have to make sure that those courthouses are accessible in the most basic sense, and many of them, unfortunately, are not fit for purpose. Many of the protections which we would wish to put in place, for example, for vulnerable victims and witnesses, are not possible, as everybody enters through the one door at the front of the courthouse, and so we're not able to do the segregation that we would normally expect in some of our more recent purpose-built facilities. Limavady Courthouse is the smallest courthouse in our estate, and since 2002 has only heard adult magistrate business. In 2023-24, only 476 cases were received by Limavady Magistrates Court, and it has historically had the lowest business volumes in the court estate, which is one of the reasons why it was previously only open a single day each week. However, it is right to say that as part of the decision-making process, access to justice will be one of the crucial issues. But it has to be looked at in the round, including as to whether, for example, we're able to be DDA compliant when it comes to access to the buildings, as well as whether people live adjacent to them.
Ferguson.
Speaker, Minister, I had previously asked in relation to the Derry Courthouse, and obviously you had mentioned whereby there is a potential of the additional extension and the refurb. Can I ask when we would expect any firm timelines or resourcing commitments, given the ongoing need to ensure adequate access to a modern justice system in the North West? Thank you.
Well, as the member will know, initially our thoughts were that we would not be able to provide that at the current Bishop Street location, simply due to the constrained nature of the site and the listing of that building. And so the plan had been to provide a new facility for the North West. However, fortuitously, we have now been able to obtain enough land beside the courthouse to allow us to reconfigure business so that we should be able to provide that kind of modern facility. It's still at early stages, but I will be quick to let the member know once we have a firmer set of propositions. But again, it is part of the overall estate strategy that we have to work our way through. There are a number of our court buildings which are old but are Grade 1 and Grade 2 listed and therefore need to be refurbished. There are a number of others where we have parts of the court estate distributed into accommodation that we have to pay for, whilst we have accommodation which is deteriorating rapidly through lack of use. So what we need to do is look at the whole strategy to make sure that we make best use of the buildings we have, that those that are genuinely historic buildings are maintained properly, and crucially that we're able to maintain a justice system that actually works in tandem with the estate to provide people with the best possible service.
Moving to topical questions, Justin McNulty.
Minister, the operational independence of the police is well rehearsed in this House by you. But in the past decade, the number of Catholic police officers has stalled at only a quarter of the force, and could start falling. Given your party has held the Justice Department for most of the past decade and a half, do you take any responsibility for that?
Well, I mean, I have to say that it's not just that I rehearse the independence of the PSNI, but actually your predecessors in the SDLP fought for the independence of the PSNI when it was being reformed during the patent process, argued strongly that no minister should be able to intervene with policing in the way that had happened historically in Northern Ireland, and argued that we needed a fully independent policing board in order to ensure that that was the case. And that was introduced in order to ensure that people, irrespective of their religion, irrespective of their gender, irrespective of their ethnicity, would have confidence in the PSNI. I, for my part, have consistently called for people from all backgrounds to come forward, get involved in the PSNI and be involved in a piece of service to their community, which is absolutely vital. I would encourage the member to do likewise. I know he has many connections through sport and through the community, and I would imagine, as somebody who is well respected in his community, could have great influence in getting young people to come forward and join the PSNI.
Mr McNulty.
Interesting to put responsibility on me, Minister. But since the devolution of policing and justice powers, your department has held strategic oversight of the justice system, and your party has successfully privatised the recruitment of the post of Justice Minister to the exclusion of nationalists. Given the trust, funding and recruitment challenges within policing, you could and should have made public confidence in policing a priority. You have not. Minister, please tell us what urgent actions you will take as Minister for Justice to ensure that policing reflects the society it serves.
Well, a couple of things about the supplementary. First and foremost, the member says it's not his responsibility, but it's all of our responsibility to ensure that the PSNI is reflective of the community. Every single person who walks through the doors of this chamber have a responsibility to ensure that their community has confidence in the PSNI, cooperates with the PSNI and creates an environment where the PSNI are safe to do their jobs. So I certainly will not wash my hands of that responsibility, and I hope the SDLP aren't going down the route of trying to do so. When it comes to the wider issue that he raises about prioritising confidence in the PSNI, I have, because I respect the independence of the Chief Constable. There would be nothing more toxic to policing in Northern Ireland than where the politicians start to get involved in dabbling in operational decision-making of the PSNI. You have a member, with respect, Mr McNulty, on the policing board. I suggest you converse with him about how you can best build confidence in the PSNI in your community.
Alan Chambers.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Minister, can I ask how many members of the PSNI have been excluded from potential ill health retirement due to declared pre-existing conditions, and what steps, if any, are you taking to try and address this matter?
I don't have the statistics on the number of people who haven't yet been able to receive their ill health retirement, and it wouldn't be for me to make those decisions, because the decisions on ill health retirement fall to the PSNI to make, and they're a matter for the Chief Constable. However, we have worked hard to ensure that we are able to find the medics capable of actually making those decisions and assessments, both for injury and duty and for ill health retirement, but I don't hold the figures that the member asks for.
Mr Chambers.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, would you be in a position to detail how many officers are currently receiving no salary while this matter remains unresolved?
Well, again, the payment of salaries is not a matter for the Department of Justice, and so no, I wouldn't hold those figures, and neither would my department.
Peter McReynolds.
Minister, what impact will the recently published Prevalence and Impact of Adverse Childhood Experiences in Northern Ireland report have on public service delivery?
Well, I think that there are a number of impacts that it can have. I mean, the prevalence and impact of adverse childhood experiences in Northern Ireland. The report shows that 60% of our adult population have reported at least one adverse childhood experience, and nearly 1 in 5 have experienced 4 or more. Correlation between higher ACE exposure and poor life outcomes, from educational achievement to chronic health conditions to substance misuse and abuse, points to a pressing need for enhanced investment in targeted intervention and support. However, it is not all bad news, because the report also identifies how positive childhood experiences can counterbalance adverse childhood experiences and help people to go on and live and thrive and live healthy and productive lives. So I think that using a trauma-informed approach throughout government and right across government, we can actually turn around the long tail that we have in society of people who have been profoundly affected and continue to be profoundly affected by violence in our society. However, if we're going to address societal trauma of that level, it requires sustained long-term intervention and investment, and that will be something across the executive, not solely for the Department of Justice.
Mr McReynolds.
Minister, do you agree this report could inform how the executive can target resources and interventions at an early stage to prevent further costs across public services down the line?
Minister.
Without doubt, and I would really commend members to read the study. It is instructive in terms of how our experiences, particularly those related to paramilitary and organised crime, have left us with a legacy. Many of the issues we talk about in this chamber on a weekly basis, people who have achieved less in terms of school, people who struggle to be able to hold down a job, people who have complex PTSD and severe mental health needs, people with higher levels of alcohol dependency and substance misuse and abuse, people with higher levels of physical disability. All of these can be tracked back in this report to our society and how people have grown up and the experiences that they have had. But what it also does is show that early intervention through health, through education, through communities, through the economy, through justice and every other department can make an actual difference in outcomes for young people. And so I think that whilst the report in many ways is depressing in the extent that adverse childhood experience have affected our society, I think it offers a way forward for the executive in terms of evidencing why early intervention is so important.
The answer side.
Mr Speaker, and I thank the Minister for her answers so far. Minister, could you please detail the amount of money spent out of public funds by the Police Ombudsman as a result of the recent legal action taken by the Northern Ireland Retired Police Officers Association?
Mr.
I don't hold the figures for the piece for the legal action that was taken by the Ombudsman's office, as I've explained to members before. The Ombudsman is a corporation sole appointed by royal warrant on the advice of the First and Deputy First Minister. I have oversight of her office, and I'm about to have an oversight meeting with her in the next few weeks, but not of the Ombudsman and her decisions herself, in which she acts completely independently of me. However, you can write to the Ombudsman's office and ask for that information, and it should be forthcoming, but it hasn't been presented to me, and I don't hold those figures.
Mr. Forsyth.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for your answer. In terms of education, quite often questions are brought to the Education Minister where the Education Authority have taken decisions. The Health Minister answers questions in particular of different health trusts. I would ask Minister, why do you not feel that under the Justice Ministry that this is information that you could present to this House?
Minister.
There are a number of reasons. There are different legislative constructs that were put in place for very particular purposes in order to ensure the absolute independence of the Police Ombudsman's Office and the independence of, for example, the judiciary and the independence of the PSNI and the board to which I've already referred. So the legislative framework is different. I do answer questions with respect to prison service. I do answer questions with respect to probation, because they are not covered by the same legislative constraints. But to be clear, there is no mechanism whatsoever in legislation for any assessment of the Ombudsman and the Ombudsman herself and her performance, and there never has been. It is only the office that I can hold to account for their performance, and that is against the annual plan which the Ombudsman sets.
Guy Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister, 2 weeks ago, over the course of a weekend, 9 PSNI officers were injured across the Londonderry and Strabane area whilst dealing with crimes within our community. On Wednesday past, 2 further PSN officers were assaulted whilst on duty. As Minister for Justice, what are you doing to support those PSNI officers who are continuing to deal with these types of assaults and threats?
Minister.
Well, there are a number of things. First and foremost, I've contacted the Chief Constable about the particular incidents that took place and extended my support and solidarity, not just to the officers who were affected, but to their families and their colleagues who have to face into those kinds of situations every day, and showed great courage and fortitude in continuing with their work, even though they had been subjected to quite significant injury. The other issue is, I suppose, what I say publicly, and I take every opportunity that I have to say that I do not believe that it is acceptable that we price in to a career in policing the fact that you will be assaulted by members of the public. It is not acceptable. When somebody goes out in the morning to serve our community, when they go out to keep us safe, and when they put themselves between us and harm, they have a right to expect our support, our cooperation, and to be safe in doing so. And that is the least that they should expect from us. There is lots of accountability with regards to police who behave badly, but there also must be accountability on the members of the public who behave badly towards them. And that's why I'm bringing forward in the sentencing bill later this year additional aggravating factors around attacking someone who is delivering a public service or is a public servant or delivering a service to the public, which covers, I think, quite a gamut of people who put themselves out there every day to serve the public and do not deserve to be abused or threatened or attacked for doing so. I've also had conversations with the Chief Constable on this matter, because I am concerned about the impact that it has both on morale and recruitment, and he has been very clear that from his perspective, the days of dropping charges when someone assaults a police officer as one of those things that just happens in the system are over. That when people assault a police officer, it will be treated as assault and it should be prosecuted.
Mr. Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for her response? When health workers are attacked, rightly so, it's condemned. There should be zero tolerance. When fire service operators are attacked, again, it should be condemned. There should be zero tolerance. Unfortunately, the PSNI don't seem to receive the same respect right across the board. Can the Minister maybe outline, in terms of those proposals that she has around sentencing, etc., a possible timeline for when we're like to see those types of things come forward?
Minister.
My hope would be that the legislation would be introduced in the autumn of this year, so somewhere between September and Christmas. That's the timeline that we're working to with the Justice Committee and with OLC. In terms of the wider point, I think you're absolutely right. Those who work in the justice sector are no less deserving of protections than those who work in the health sector or those who work, for example, in any other part of the public sector, where this kind of violence and intimidation and threat and abuse would not be tolerated. It should not be tolerated in the justice sector either, and we're very clear, for example, we talked earlier about attacks on prison officers. That has to be dealt with as seriously as we would treat an attack on any member of the public. We cannot simply price this into a career in the justice system. It's not acceptable. When you do that, you not only harm the individual who you've attacked, but you potentially are putting someone else at harm who's waiting for them to arrive to give them assistance, and it could be a life or death situation that you're intervening in. So people need to realise the seriousness of what they're doing, the damage to their wider community, and they need to stop.
Maurice Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Minister if she would agree with me that the criminal justice system is described as being in crisis? requiring urgent action to address the systemic issues and ensure the system can function effectively. These challenges highlight the need for significant budgetary support and strategic planning to ensure the justice system can meet the needs of the community. And Minister, if you can answer that in the time left, I will be mightily impressed.
Minister.
I agree with you completely, and it is why I have made the case repeatedly in this House that we cannot underfund the justice system and still expect it to perform its functions as though by magic. We need to properly resource our justice system at every point in the system to ensure that when members of the public need that support, it's there for them.
Mr Bradley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Getting another one in. What strategic planning and adequate funding to ensure the justice system can effectively protect and serve the public, including but not exclusively reduced police presence and 15 years of underfunding has increased pressures with an adverse effect on crime prevention and crime detection?
Minister.
For policing to work, it has to start with neighbourhood policing. It has to start with local communities feeling a positive impact from that policing. One of the positive things to come out of some recent reviews has been that actually neighbourhood policing is very highly rated in terms of its quality by the community. Where it falls down is its frequency. And so what I want to do is get to a point, and that's why we have the recovery plan I spoke to earlier. I want to get to a point where we have the resources to build police numbers up so that we're able to have dedicated units who are engaged with community policing, doing exactly what the member has suggested, and able to do it in a consistent way that builds trust and confidence within the community and hopefully encourages other people to come forward and join the PSNI and support the work they do.
That concludes questions to the Minister for Justice. Point of order, Mr O'Toole.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and with my apologies for indulging in points of order and dosing you on them twice in one day. In the past hour and a half, the ERA Minister, the Environment Minister, Agriculture Minister, his department have issued under embargo a written statement further to what I